Welcome to your 40-second Java tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss event handling and setting up the action listener. Now, in the last video, we set up the GUI, our first graphical user interface. And we could, of course, click on the buttons, resize the windows, but our application could not respond to user events. And that is what we call event handling. And that is what we are going to cover in this video. Now, a user event is something that happens behind the scenes quite a bit. When you turn on your computer and you open up your browser or you start typing on it, user events are being generated in the background. And so when you click on the mouse or you type in keystrokes, any type of input device, user events will be generated. Now, before we can receive any events, we have to set up our program to listen. It has to have the ability to listen. And Java gives us an interface. Remember we did interfaces a couple videos ago? Well, now we're going to be using them for a real application. So again, Java gives us an event listener interface that we can set up so that our objects can listen, or in other words, wait for a user event to happen. And what do interfaces contain? They have methods, and those methods will receive the user input. Now, there are two things we need to do to set up the listener. First is we need to import the package, and the package that we're going to import is right here. It's the java.awt.event library. And you can set it up just the way I have it right there. So we used the swing library in the last video. We imported that. So we need both of those. And it's the AWT library that contains the interfaces that we need to set up the listener. And of course, we need to use the implements keyword for the listener interface that we're going to use. And it's going to be action listener, as you can see right here. And what this interface will do is will allow one of our components, in this case the button that we added in the last video, we're going to be using that same button, it will allow it to generate user events. And there are different types of listeners, and we will review some of those in the coming videos. But for this video, we're going to set up the action listener. And again, this is something that's very common to all the languages. You're going to have to start dealing with user events on a regular basis. So whether you're doing Visual Basic or C# or Java, they all have user events. That is, they allow user input. And when you allow user input, something goes on in the background. And that something is what we're going to be looking at in this video. Now, the action listener has one method. And the name of that method is right here. It's action performed. Now, you will remember when we talked about interfaces, those methods are blank. This is the method that will get invoked by the action listener interface. So it will send the events to this method, and then this method, action performed, will do something. And that something that we will do is up to us. We have to fill in their method. Remember, it's up to us to fill in the method. The interface's methods are all blank. The setup is there, but we have to fill in what's going to happen once the user clicks the button. And when they click that button, the action performed method will get invoked and it will do whatever we tell it to do. Okay, so let's review this once again. So we are going to import this library, the AWT library. We're going to use the action listener interface. Now, this is a method that I created called create and show GUI. And again, I like to use method names that are rather descriptive. So this is doing exactly what we want this method to do. We want it to create and show our GUI. And it's very similar to the last video. Remember, we made our JFrame object right here. And here we are going to make our button object. And you guys will recognize these parameters, right? We used all of those in the last video, but what's different is we're giving the button object an action listener. We're adding it to the button. Remember, the object has to listen. It has to wait for something. And so for each component or each object that we add to our window, our JFrame, we need to add a listener to it. So if I had 4 or 5 more buttons in here, each one of those we would want to have a listener for. And so this is where you add it. And this keyword, this argument that's in here, simply says this listener right here is assigned to this object. That's all that means. And then once we click on that button, the action performed method will get invoked. It'll actually, we need these arguments. These are the arguments that we have to put in here. And whatever we tell it to do will be inside this method. And of course, main will kick it off. So we're going to create our GUI object, and then our GUI object will invoke our create and show GUI method. And then it's just sitting out there waiting for a user to click the button. And so if we run this, you can see nothing's happened, right? We don't have anything in that method. It's kind of the same result as the last video. We're submitting this, but this method is blank. So we got to put something in here for it to do something. And so the program's just kind of sitting out here running, and the listener's sitting here waiting for us to click on this. And when we click on it, something will happen. So let's go ahead and fill in our action performed method. And we will go ahead and do our famous system out.print. And we will just type in information has been submitted. Let's go ahead and rerun this. And let's actually make this window a little bit larger. And if we click on this, now you can see we've got our output to the user. We sent this to the output window, and it says information has been submitted. But up to now, we've kind of been doing system.out.prints to the output window. Why don't we do something a little bit different? Let's actually return the output to the actual application window here. And so we're going to do something a little bit different. So let's go ahead and comment this out. And we're going to put in some new code here. And we're going to invoke our button.object. And what we're looking for is set text, and it's down here somewhere. Let's see. And you can see all the different methods we could use, and we'll go through a lot of these in future videos, but for now we're just going to do a set text, and there it is. So you can see we can put a string in here, and we're just going to put something similar to what we had in the sys.out. We're just going to put information has been submitted, but this is going to be very different because now we're actually returning this to the application. So let's close our output window and rerun this. And let's go over here, move this over here. We'll hit submit, and look, it was returned to our application. Now, I want to show you something before we close this video out. I want to actually bring up the code from the last video. So let's close this out, and let's close these out. And let's actually resize this window here a little bit so you can see, so we can have both code lines up. Okay, that's good. And then let's bring up the old code from what we did in the last video. And that's just this notepad here. Now, what I wanted to show you is talk a little bit, and we talked about this in previous videos, but I wanted to stress variable scope. Now, in this last video, we just stuck everything in the main method because we didn't really care about setting up a listener. We just wanted to fire up the window and do it quickly so we could just throw everything in the main method. Here, though, we had to actually, to set up the listener, we had to do quite a bit more. We had to set up this create and show GUI method, and we just used the main method just to fire up the object and fire up the create and show GUI method. That's all we did. Everything else happened up here. Now, what I wanted to show you is if you notice in this code over here, you'll see that I declared and created the object button in the method. And so in a sense, this is a local variable. And you'll see here that I declared a global variable up here. And then, so we declared the variable up here, but down here is where we actually created the object. So we kind of split it up. Now, had I not done that, and this was not a global variable, this method would not have been able to access this variable because it would have been local to this method. Let me show you that. Let's get rid of this, and we'll actually go ahead and create it here now. And you can see he no longer has access to it. So keep in mind, scope is very, very important. That's why we have to declare this as a global variable up here. This now, since I did this, this is local only to this method, the scope of this method. And so that's why this method no longer has access to the object. So that's why it's important to remember scope. So let's put that back. And you can see it goes green now. Let's get rid of the type here. And you can see everything's green. And now all of the methods will have access to the button object because it's been declared as a global variable. So just keep that in mind. Some of these concepts that we were talking about before are now coming into play. Okay, that is going to do it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video.